Hello and welcome to Race for the White House, our daily show where we get you the latest from the 2024 U.S. presidential election. On today's show, we tell you how Kamala Harris and the Democrats are increasingly worried about whether they can actually pull off a victory in the presidential polls. Also on the show, we tell you how Donald Trump's praise for one world leader is making headlines. All of this and much more, so let's get started. Kamala Harris has had a much better run than many could have possibly expected. Just a few months ago, she unexpectedly stepped into Joe Biden's shoes as the Democratic nominee for president. And to be fair to Harris, she has energized her party and brought in hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. But with just weeks until election day, things are not going as smoothly as expected. Despite Harris leading a successful Democratic convention and bringing in massive campaign funds, the race with Donald Trump is still incredibly tight. Harris is locked in close battles in crucial swing states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And polls show that these states are almost a dead heat between these two candidates. Democrats are now getting nervous because some of these polls show that Harris's level of support in almost every key swing state has declined since September. Trump has actually stolen a lead in key states like Arizona and Georgia, while Harris's lead has been cut in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. One issue is that Harris is the first major party presidential nominee in 6 decades who hasn't won a competitive primary. This has led to several doubts among Democrats about her ability to pull a victory off in November. Another issue is where and how the Harris campaign is deploying its resources. Democrats are divided on which voter groups to focus on. Some believe that they should go after moderate Republicans who don't really support Trump anymore. Others believe that the key is to mobilize minority voters, especially men of color who haven't turned out in large numbers yet. And of course, then there's the concern that Trump's strength with men might be too much of an obstacle to overcome for the Democrats. They're also worried that even though they have multiple paths to reaching 270 electoral votes, which is what Harris needs to win the White House, none of those paths feel guaranteed because, as we said earlier, polling shows tight races in all the key swing states. Harris's campaign is so far focused on visiting rural counties and red districts that voted for Trump, but it is an effort to cut into Trump's margin of victory from 2020, which is proving to be difficult. Despite all of this, Harris and her team have repeatedly described themselves as underdogs and are campaigning as such. Harris's campaign is working hard to engage with black men and Hispanic voters, groups that played a big role in Joe Biden's victory in 2020, but haven't so far shown the same level of support for Harris. There's also concern among the Democrats about young voters and Arab Americans, many of whom are frustrated with American foreign policy in the Middle East, especially as the conflict between Israel and several other Middle Eastern powers intensifies. With just a few weeks left for the election, Harris does not have much time to shore up her support and fend off Donald Trump. Moving on, Vice President Kamala Harris has raised an astonishing $1 billion since entering the presidential race in late July. Remember that it's just been over 2 months since Harris stepped into the role of Democratic nominee for president. While other presidential candidates have reached this level of fundraising in the past, few have done it as quickly as Harris. Meanwhile, Donald Trump and the Republican Party have raised around $430 million between July and September this year. That is a significant sum, but nowhere near what Harris has collected. Now, this does give Harris a big financial advantage in the election, and it does look like every single dollar is going to matter. Although both campaigns have spent millions of dollars in key swing states, polls indicate that the race could still go either way. This means that both campaigns will need to continue to spend heavily in the coming weeks to secure victory. Now, this is especially true for Harris. Although she has more financial firepower than Trump, there is a sense that Harris and her campaign are fighting against some fundamental issues. Now, this is especially true of Harris. Although she has more financial firepower than Trump, there is a sense that she's fighting an uphill battle. Confidence in the economy is low, and there is general dissatisfaction with how things are going in America. Only about 28% of Americans think the country is headed in the right direction. President Biden's approval rating is also low. In addition, America is now involved in 2 global conflicts, the war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East. All of this is bad news for Vice President Kamala Harris. She has undoubtedly done well to raise large amounts of money in such a short period of time, and clearly enjoys more public support than Joe Biden. And despite the negative mood surrounding Joe Biden's performance in office, she has made the race competitive. But she also faces a much tougher fight than Biden did in 2020 when he defeated Trump. And while she may have larger financial reserves, it may not end up being enough. Remember that in 2016, Hillary Clinton outraised Donald Trump by a massive margin and still managed to lose the election. With just a month to go for the polls on November 5th, Harris's campaign will do all it can to use its financial advantage well. But will it be enough? Only time will tell. Moving on, former US President Donald Trump has made headlines with his recent praise for Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In an interview on the Flagged podcast, which is hosted by popular entertainers Andrew Schulz and Akash Singh, he praised Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He called him his friend and the nicest human being.
Modi, India.
Yeah.
He's a friend of mine. He's great. He's the nicest.
India.
Yeah.
This is for you.
Oh, good. Well, I'll tell you. Do you like him or not?
Yeah.
Do you like him?
I have family on both sides of it.
Okay,
I have
well,
family
let me
that
tell
loves
you.
everything and family
I'll just
that's
tell you,
not.
though. You meet him. I know. Well, they had, before him, they were replacing him every year. It was very unstable. He came along.
He's in a lot of
He's
construction.
great. He's a friend of mine. But on the outside, he looks like he's your father. He's the nicest. Total killer. Because I asked him,
Yeah.
we're talking, we did a thing called Howdy Modi in Houston, Texas.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And they filled up the stadium. It was me and him.
Yeah.
We filled up the stadium. It was beautiful. Like 80,000 people. It was going crazy. And we're walking around. Today, maybe I wouldn't be as, maybe you wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But we're walking in the middle, waving to everybody. Anyway, but we have a very good relationship. He's the nicest human being. But we had a couple of occasions where somebody was threatening India. I said, let me help. I'm very good with those people. Let me help. I will do it. I will do it. And I will do anything necessary. We've defeated them for hundreds of years.
Wow.
He was talking about a certain country. Okay?
Yeah.
You can probably guess the country.
Yeah.
Can't fathom which.
Do you know the country?
Yeah.
But I said, whoa, what happened there? What happened? So, no, they're all tough and they're all smart. And some are very good people. He's a good person. There's some are good people and some aren't good people. But they're all at the top of their game.
Now, Modi and Trump have had a close relationship since the latter was first elected US President in 2017. A big landmark in that relationship was Modi's visit to America in 2019. As Trump recalled in that interview, the visit saw the Howdy Modi mega event in Houston, Texas. In front of a massive audience of around 80,000 people, Modi refashioned his election slogan in India for Trump and said, "Ab ki baar Trump sarkar," or this time it's going to be a Trump government. This was particularly important because it came right before the 2020 US presidential elections. Then in 2020, Trump visited India for the Namaste Trump event in Gujarat. Around 100,000 people attended that event. Trump praised Modi's leadership during the event and also talked about India's progress under him. Trump also stated recently at a campaign event that he was set to meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi during the latter's visit to America this September. But that meeting didn't end up happening. Though it does seem that Trump and Modi's friendship remains strong, which will reassure some Indians if Trump is in fact re-elected to the White House in November. Our White House correspondent Rohit Sharma now joins us with more details on this story. Rohit, thanks so much for joining us. Could you tell us a little bit about what was talked about in this podcast with Donald Trump?
Well, look, President Trump was asked an open-ended question. He was asked about some of the foreign leaders and are they shark or not? And the first name that popped up in his head was of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He called him his friend, and this is not the first time that Prime Minister Modi has been called as a friend by President Trump. He went on to talk about Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He asked one of the podcast host about if does he like Prime Minister Modi and what about his family, and so there was a little back and forth there during that about 2 minutes of President Trump talking about India and Prime Minister Modi, and he praised Prime Minister Modi. He also talked about the Howdy Modi event that was in Texas, and how they were walking hand in hand, and 80,000 some people that Trump refers to were in the in that arena that day. So look, Prime Minister Modi has obviously made an impression on President Trump, and President Trump feels that Prime Minister Modi is a dear friend and somebody he can work with. And this is not the first time he said that. But the fact that he went on to then detail about how he's a tough guy, and he comes across as this father figure and a nice guy, but when push comes to shove, and he alluded to the fact that when India had trouble with its neighbors, and he didn't specify, but India obviously had an issue with Pakistan during the Balakot strikes, and what had happened then, and also during 2020 the border crisis. So, he sort of alluded to the fact that Prime Minister Modi came, on his own, and
So, Rohit, there's been a lot of conversation about the Trump-Modi relationship in the past, and whether Trump's praise for Modi is somehow an attempt to win over voters in the Indian American community. Could I ask you, was this something like a political ploy on Trump's behalf? And last question, Rohit, I have to ask you whether you think this will actually have an impact on Indian American voters. Right. Thanks so much, Rohit, for joining us. Now it's time to move on to our segment Poll Watch, where we talk numbers. With less than a month remaining for the US presidential polls, the race for the White House remains intense. Vice President Kamala Harris is still holding on to her narrow lead nationally, but it still remains a neck-to-neck battle in key swing states. So let's take a look at how the key presidential contenders are doing in the polls today. According to the New York Times Siena poll, Harris is leading nationally with 49% of public support to Trump's 46%. Meanwhile, in the swing state of Michigan, Harris maintains a 49-48 lead over Trump. In the states of Pennsylvania and Nevada, both key swing states that both Harris and Trump will need to win, Harris has a 49-48 advantage over Trump. Meanwhile, in Wisconsin, Harris has a lead with 50% of public support, while Trump is at 48%. In Arizona, Trump maintains his lead with 49% public support, while Harris is now at 47%. In Georgia, both candidates are tied with 48% public support. And finally, in North Carolina, Trump is leading with 49% public support, while Harris is at 48%. With the race this tight, it's no wonder that some analysts are calling this the closest presidential election in US history. And now it's time to bring you some updates from American politics that you might have missed. Hurricane Milton has finally made landfall in the state of Florida, and it is causing major destruction. Almost 2.8 million homes and businesses are without power, while some deaths have also been reported. Heavy rains, high wind speeds, and storm surges are threatening the state of Florida. Hurricane Milton, along with Hurricane Helene, has become a political flashpoint in the 2024 elections. Former President Donald Trump has blamed the Biden administration for not giving enough money and support to disaster-hit states. Now, this has become a major political battle, with Biden and Harris hitting back at Trump's attempts to politicize disaster relief. These two hurricanes have changed the complexion of the elections. These natural disasters have shaped public perceptions of how competent an administration is. For example, Obama's successful handling of a hurricane in 2012 worked to his advantage in his bid for re-election. Moving on, Republicans are moving to question the legitimacy of overseas votes. This comes after a group of Republican congressmen from Pennsylvania filed a lawsuit to challenge votes from US citizens living abroad. They say that they want stricter rules to verify the eligibility of these voters. Now, this lawsuit claims that local officials are not required to check the identity of overseas voters, which could lead to fraud. The group also says that ballots shouldn't be counted until eligibility is confirmed. This lawsuit could impact military personnel stationed overseas, a group which was once seen as favoring Republicans, but now seems more evenly split. Critics argue that this is an attempt to contest the election outcome if Kamala Harris beats Donald Trump. Pennsylvania has already sent out around 25,000 ballots to Americans abroad, and these votes could be crucial in a close election. The lawsuit raises concerns about the accuracy of the final vote count in tight races. And finally, Senator J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, pitched the Republican ticket to Latino voters in Arizona. Remember, Arizona is an absolutely crucial swing state. Vance emphasized that Latino women want common sense, safe communities, and good schools. He also mentioned that Latinos represent all walks of life in America, from those who have been there for generations to also more recent citizens. He criticized the loss of manufacturing jobs and also criticized higher mortgage rates as well as a lack of housing. Now, Vance encouraged Latino voters to consider the Republican coalition and to back Trump's leadership on the economy. Now, this is not coming out of the blue. While Latinos have traditionally voted for the Democratic Party in large numbers, it seems that increasing numbers of the community are looking at the Republican ticket. Vance pointed out to increasing Latino support for Trump due to his strong border policies in that speech. And his speech was also a strong pitch to attract these voters away from the Democrats towards the Republican ticket. That's all we have for you today on Race for the White House. Thank you so much for watching us on India Today Global. You can catch us again tomorrow.